This is the video for section 8.1. The homework assignment was page 487, 2 to 26 even. I will be doing page 487, numbers 1 through 25 odd. Alright, the first question says x squared is equal to 16. We learned in the last chapter that in order to get rid of a square root, we square it. So it makes sense that in order to get rid of a square, we just square root it. So I'm going to square root both sides. That's going to the squared and the squared are going to cancel, leaving you x equals the square root of 16. Now, whenever you physically write the square root yourself, so you see how I wrote this? Then when you go to answer it, your answer needs to be plus or minus. So, x equals the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Okay, anytime you write the square root symbol, then you need to write plus or minus in front of the 4. Okay. Number 3 says, x squared minus 7 is equal to 0. Okay, I need to get this squared by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 7 to both sides. That's going to leave me x squared is equal to 7. Now I'm going to square root both sides to get rid of the squared. Square root and the square cancel, leaving you x equals the square root of 7. But remember, because I wrote this square root, it needs to be plus or minus the square root of 7, which means your answer is the square root of 7 and negative square root of 7. Alright, number 5 says x squared equals 18. Since the squared is already by itself on the left, I'm going to square both sides. Your square root and your squared cancel, leaving you x equals the square root of 18. But again, I wrote the square root. If you write the radical, then it's plus or minus. So this is x equals plus or minus the square root of 18. However, I bet the square root of 18 simplifies. Let's try. 18 is 9 times 2, and 9 is 3 times 3. So yeah, I can bring a 3 out front and leave a 2 inside. So x equals plus or minus 3 square root of 2. And that's your final answer. Remember, you always want to write your final answer in simplest form. Alright, number 7 says 3z minus 30 is equal to 0. Okay, in order to get the z by itself, I'm going to add 30 to both sides. That's going to leave you 3z squared is equal to 30. Okay, we want to get z squared by itself, so I can get rid of that squared. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 30, which is going to leave me z squared is equal to 10. I want to get rid of the squared, so I'm going to square root both sides. The square root and the square cancel, leaving you z is equal to the square root of 10. But again, I wrote the radical, or I warped. There, I can spell. I wrote the radical. So it's z is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, if you just write the square root of 10, you will actually be wrong. So make sure that you're writing plus or minus the square root of 10. Alright, now we have x plus 5 squared is equal to 9. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to square root both sides. Square root and squared cancel, leaving you x plus 5 is equal to the square root of 9. Now, because I wrote the square root of 9, it's plus or minus the square root of 9. So you have two problems here. X plus 5 is equal to positive square root of 9, and x plus 5 is equal to negative square root of 9. We know the square root of 9 is 3, so I'm going to say x plus 5 is 3. And then I'll subtract 5 from both sides, and I'll get x equals negative 2. And then over here, we know that the square root of 9 is 3. So this is going to become negative 3 because of this negative right here. And then I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 8. So your answers are 2 and negative 8. Alright, number 11 says z minus 6 squared is equal to 18. Our equal sign shifted over there a little bit. So in order to get rid of our squared, I'm going to square root both sides. Square root and square cancel, leaving you z minus 6 is equal to the square root of 18. But I created that radical, so it needs to be plus or minus. So you have z minus 6 is equal to positive square root of 18, and then you have z minus 6 is equal to negative square root of 18. Okay, so square root of 18 can be simplified to 9 and 2 and 3 and 3. So you'll have z minus 6 is equal to 3 square root of 2. And then over here you'll have z minus 6 is equal to 18 simplified I just did over there. It'll just be negative 3 square root of 2. So now you're going to add 6 to both sides. So you have z is equal to 6 plus 3 square root of 2. And then over here, when I add 6 to both sides, you'll have z is equal to 6 minus 3 square root of 2. All right, number 13 says 2x minus 3 squared is equal to 8. So you square root both sides. Squared and square root cancel, leaving you 2x minus 3 is equal to, because I wrote that square root, it's plus or minus the square root of 8. So I'm going to have 2x minus 3 equals positive square root of 8, and 2x minus 3 equals negative square root of 8. Now let's see if 8 can be simplified. 8 is 4 and 2, and 4 is 2 and 2. So yeah, it can be simplified. 2x minus 3 is equal to, I'm going to pull a 2 out front and leave a 2 inside. So then it'll be the same thing over here. 2x minus 3 is equal to, but it'll just be negative. Negative 2 square root of 2. Alright, now I'm going to add 3 to both sides, which leaves you 2x is equal to 3 plus 2 square root of 2. And then you're going to divide both sides by 2. And you'll get x is equal to 3 plus 2 square root of 2 over 2. And then over here, I'll add 3 to both sides, leaving you 2x is equal to 3 minus 2 square root of 2. Divide both sides by 2, and you get x is equal to 3 minus 2 square root of 2 over 2. And those are your answers. Okay, number 15 says x squared plus 9 is equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides, which is going to give me x squared is equal to negative 9. Then in order to get rid of the squared, I'm going to square root both sides. Squared and square root cancel, leaving you x equals the square root of negative 9. Well, and because we wrote that square root, we'll go ahead and write plus or minus in the front of it. We know that whenever there is a negative under a radical, when our index is even, that's going to give us an imaginary number. So we can change this to x equals plus or minus I square root of 9. So all I did was take care of this negative under here. And we also know that the square root of 9 is just 3. So you say x is equal to plus or minus 3i. Okay, so your answers are 3i and negative 3i. Alright, so now number 17 is supposed to be, that's not right. Number 17 is x squared minus 6 is equal to 0. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So you have x squared is equal to 6. Then you're going to take the square root of each side to get rid of the squared, leaving you x is equal to, remember, plus or minus the square root of 6, because we made that square root. And you can't simplify it square root of 6 at all, so that is your answer. Okay, number 19 says 2z squared plus 16 is equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 16 from both sides, leaving you 2z squared is equal to negative 16. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So you have z squared is equal to negative 8. Take the square root of both sides in order to get rid of the squared, leaving you z is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 8. It's plus or minus because we created that root. Okay, now negative 8 can be broken down, first off, because there is a negative under the radical when I'm dealing with an even index. I'm going to bring an I out front. So I have plus or minus I square root of 8. And then let's go ahead and simplify 8. 8 is 4 and 2, and 4 is 2 and 2. So I can bring a 2 out front and leave a 2 inside. So then I have z is equal to plus or minus 2, which I'm going to bring out front. That was these 2's right here, bringing one of them out front. I from the I right here, which we got from under the negative. And then you've got square root of 2, and that's because of the 2 that was left over here. So your answer is z is equal to plus or minus 2i square root of 2. Okay, number 21 says x minus 1 squared is equal to negative 16. So I'm going to square both sides. The square root and the square cancel, leaving you x minus 1 is equal to the square root of negative 16. Then you're going to add 1 to both sides. And remember, this is plus or minus the square root of negative 16 because we created it. So you have x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 16 plus 1. And the plus 1 is outside of the radical. Now, when you have a negative under your radical with an even index, you're talking about imaginary numbers. So I'm going to bring an I out front. So plus or minus I square root of 16 plus 1. And we know that the square root of 16 is 4. So you have x equals plus or minus 4i plus 1. And it's actually better if you write it x equals 1 plus or minus 4i. Okay? Because you want your operation to be in the middle. So this plus or minus should be in the middle. 23. Z plus 7 squared is equal to 5. Oops. So I'm going to square root both sides, which is going to leave me z plus 7 is equal to plus or minus, forgot the plus, square root of 5. It's plus or minus because I made that radical. So then I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and you have z is equal to negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 5. Remember, I told you you need to write it in this order because that's what's correct. And you can't simplify square root of 5 any further, so we're just going to leave it at that. Okay, 25 is x plus 3 squared is equal to negative 8. Take the square root of both sides in order to get the square root to cancel, leaving you x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus, because we made the radical, of negative 8. Then I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, which gives you x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 8. See how I wrote it in the correct order there? But now let's go ahead and deal with the square root of negative 8. The negative underneath tells me I'm going to bring an I outside, so everything else will stay the same. And then I can go ahead and simplify the 8. 4 and 2, 2 and 2. So a 2 is going to come outside and a 2 is going to stay inside. So I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus. I bring a 2 outside, multiplied by that I gives you 2i. And then you have this 2 left on the inside, so it's radical 2. So your answer is negative 3 plus or minus 2i square root of 2. And that does it for the videos, or for the video for today. Hope you guys have a good day.